Sustainability. Oh, the webinar is now live. Okay, should I start now? Hello, everyone, and welcome to this roundtable on sustainable fashion. My name is Gianna Eckhart, and I am a professor of marketing at Royal Holloway, University of London, and the director of the Center for Research in Sustainability, which is one of the sponsors of the roundtable today. To just tell you a little bit about our center, we are a multidisciplinary international group of researchers and educators at Royal Holloway, University of London. We study social, ethical, economic, and environmental sustainability in contemporary society through research, education, and collaboration with businesses, NGOs, and governments. So this event that we're doing today is absolutely right up our alley, and we're really pleased to be able to be involved in it. So what I would like to do now is introduce the speakers as well as our other co-host of the event today, who I'll introduce in a moment. And then I will pose questions for the panel and we'll have kind of a lively discussion. For the audience, we're very much looking forward to your participation. So please do write your comments and questions in the chat box, and I will be sure to ask your comments of the panelists, and so we can have a lively discussion. So to introduce the panelists for today, our first panelist that we have is Anne Liu. She is a PhD student at De Montfort University, studying motivations for engaging in slow fashion, and she's also a lecturer at Beijing Normal University. We also have Dr. Emily Barnes with us.
Baines.
Pardon me? Oh.
Hi. Baines, sorry.
Hi, we also have Dr. Emily Baines with us, who is a senior lecturer at De Montfort University in the School of Design. She specializes in sustainable design in the fashions and textile industry, and has been teaching in the field of sustainable and design and CSR since 2004. We were supposed to have Kirsty Reitan with us today, but she unfortunately had a family emergency. The same for Meltem Toure. She had a family emergency today as well. But we also have Sonia Jetli with us today, who is a celebrated fashion designer in India, known for her handcrafted designs inspired from Indian heritage and culture. And finally on the panel, we have Dr. Vandana Jaglan, who is an officiating principal at the Satyam Fashion Institute at SNDT University in Mumbai. And she specializes in costume design, design process, craft studies, and surface design developments. So before we start chatting with the panelists, I would like to introduce you to the host of today's event, Bhavya Bishnoi. He is the founder of BGIF, who is sponsoring today's roundtable along with CRIS, which is a think tank which tackles pressing social and economic challenges through strategic partnerships, community engagement, and high impact interventions. Bhavya, would you like to tell us a little bit more about BGIF?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jana, for the kind introduction. Before I introduce BGIF, I'd like to thank CRIS, which is Center for Research and Sustainability, as well as CBS for their partnership. The Copenhagen Business School. I know that, I can speak volumes of the work that both these organizations have done in the space of sustainability, and it's truly a pleasure for BGIF to partner with the two of you for this discussion. As far as BGIF is concerned, we are a think and do tank as well. We're based in the National Capital Region of India. We use a design thinking approach where we bring together, leading academics and students of policy to research on pressing social issues. And then we have an implementation wing, which includes, again, young, passionate individuals who actually implement pilots based on the research that our policy team conducts. We've had a few projects we've implemented as pilots over the last couple of years, and we're happy to share some of those with our audience in the times to come. As far as the issue at hand is concerned, I must confess that my knowledge of sustainable fashion is quite limited, which is why I was very grateful to Gianna for taking lead on moderating this session. I would, in the interest of our audience's curiosity, like to share certain if I may, Gianna, certain statistics that were quite alarming for me. I've been reading on this topic for some time now. The fashion industry, surprisingly, is responsible for 10% of the world's annual carbon emissions. It consumes more than 80 billion cubic meters of water annually. It takes. People say that it takes killing more than 10,000 silkworms to produce a single sari of silk. I can go on and on about citing examples of how sort of environmentally unsustainable the fashion industry is, and it's quite worrying. And as someone who comes from the development space or from the policy space, it's quite disconcerting. And I think one of the core reasons for the fact that sustainable fashion hasn't quite achieved or received the kind of attention that it has is because we, on the one hand, even us as citizens as individuals don't give it much importance. I'm wearing a cotton t-shirt, but I would have never thought of the fact that it took more than 2,500 liters to produce this single shirt of cotton. If you compare this with driving a car or lighting a cigarette, we are aware somewhere subconsciously that we are harming the environment in a certain way. But unfortunately, it seems to me that we don't have the same level of awareness on sustainable, on fashion, and on clothing, and on textiles. As far as the government is concerned, again, as I understand, for policymakers, if sustainable fashion is a problem of the elite, it's not something that has really trickled down to the masses, which is why it hasn't really gained much further. But we all know that it is an issue that is of deep concern, and I'm glad that we're having this conversation and playing a small role in pushing the needle on this. Thank you for that. I know I went on longer than I had planned to, but thank you for that, Gianna. I'll leave it to you now.
Great, thank you, Bhavya, and thank you for setting up our discussion so well. Some of the sustainability issues in the fashion space that you highlighted are part of what I've been researching for the past decade, and in particular, how consumers view sustainable fashion. And as you mentioned, Bhavya, first of all, most of them aren't aware of the sustainability issues that are embedded in particular, of clothing, but also other elements of fashion, shoes, accessories, etc. And secondly, one thing that research has shown is that even though consumer awareness and also concern about these issues is rising, it doesn't necessarily translate into purchasing behavior. And so this is something that I think is really important, and I'm sure that we are going to hit on it with our panelists today. So just to kick us off with quite a broad question, let me ask the panel, what does sustainability mean in fashion? So when we talk about sustainable fashion, what exactly are we talking about, and what does this mean? Emily, please.
Okay. Well, I think that there are some emerging things that have become fairly key. So with peer pressure and competitive pressure among the companies. So quite a lot of companies are focusing on climate change and trying to be as low carbon as possible. So you have emphasis on renewable energy, various companies coming up and saying that they're 100% renewable energy in their own operations, and they've made commitments to be fully carbon neutral by 2025 or 2030 and so on. So I think that's one quite strong element. A lot of fashion companies are also talking about zero waste and avoiding waste. So that's another key aspect, and areas to do with organic materials, recycling and the circular economy, and also ethical issues. So you quite often have an emphasis on fair wages and being a member of the Ethical Trading Initiative or key types of organizations and certifications like that. So I think there's a number of areas where there are some quite ambitious targets that a number of the bigger companies, bigger international companies are going for. And but other parts of the industry are hardly awake to the issues at all. So you have quite a wide difference in approach between different companies. Some of the smaller companies much more focusing on an issue that interests them and not bothering so much about other aspects. So it might be more about diversity and inclusiveness in fit and sizing, or it might be more about upcycling fabrics or something particular that they're focusing on. So that's probably my broad, brief take.
Great, thank you. Very comprehensive. Any other thoughts on how you think about what sustainable fashion is?
Well, I think that you have quite a responsibility for the companies, and some companies are taking on that kind of extended producer responsibility much more actively and thinking about collecting the fabrics and the used garments to recycle them. So that's quite interesting to see how it's happening, and to see how fast fashion companies like H&M are taking on that as an approach so they can adopt the more circular economy emphasis, whereas other companies are going down the slow fashion approach and thinking about durability and distinctiveness and the ways that people can emotionally engage with their products, the craftsmanship, the cultural heritage. So there's quite, again, a range of approaches, but the more all these different aspects are supported, the better.
Yeah, great. Thank you. One thing that I've been researching recently is some of the different models of consumers accessing rather than buying clothes. So this is through platforms such as Rent the Runway, for example. And I think there's quite a lot of controversy about whether that is actually sustainable fashion or not, because on the one hand, you're not engaging in kind of the fast fashion cycle of constantly getting rid of your clothes and replacing them because you're wearing them for a short time, sending them back, someone else can. But on the other hand, the kind of costs to mail out and dry clean all of those clothes all of the time, it's not necessarily straightforward. So it's interesting to think about all these different models and whether they are actually sustainable fashion or not. Does any of the other panelists have any comments that you'd like to make?
I would like to share something on sustainable fashion. Basically, sustainable fashion has gained momentum in the last few years. And what do you mean by sustainable fashion? It is actually a process of maintaining change in a balanced way, in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological developments are all in harmony, and we all get to enhance both our current and future potential to meet our human needs and aspirations. So we have the three pillars of sustainable fashion are environment, economic, and social. And if you want me to elaborate, I can go forward. So basically, sustainable clothing, which is called eco fashion, is a growing, design philosophy, also known as green strategy. It is about producing clothing, shoes, accessories in a more responsible way. Fashion is evolving, and so we all need to become more conscious as consumers because of the carbon, all the footprints, the carbon footprint, the environment footprint, and the water footprint. Like Bhavya explained, that a t-shirt or a cotton consumes, like to produce a t-shirt, one t-shirt, it consumes 2,700 liters of water, which is like, it's a very, very deep thought. All of us need to really think. So how do we reduce? And we all know that fashion is the second most polluting industry after fossil fuels. Because why? Because it is responsible for 10% of carbon emissions. Now, how do we reduce all these footprints is a big question. And how do we slow down the process? So slow fashion is the need of the hour. So as Coco Chanel once said, fashion passes, fashion passes, style remains. So this is how it has become now. So we also have to understand that how should we adopt, like, change our, not only we as, as policymakers or as designers or as think tank or maybe as retailers, manufacturers, even consumers need to rethink how do we slow down the process? How do we change our purchasing habits? How do we slow down the entire process of buying? How do we, dissect, like how do we, like, segregate between fast fashion and slow fashion? And the recent incidents which have happened, like everybody, all you experts must be knowing of the Rana Plaza incident. All of you have heard about it. It was so sad. I get goosebumps even now. You know, all the labels, all the tags, what we buy at cheap cost were all being manufactured there. And 5 or 6 years back, if I'm not mistaken, this incident has created so much of awareness of why we should not buy cheap clothes, and why less is more, and why we need to rethink and become conscious and responsible. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Sonia. Vandana.
Yes. So I was just hearing about it, and to me, sustainability in fashion, if we like to say that, a beautiful environment or a sustainable environment starts with you. So I think this is the main notion which we have in sustainability to increase the longevity of the products. So we as consumers, as manufacturers, or as decision makers, we first need to think of ways for increasing the life of the products. So I think that is what is needed from all the ends, and be it pre-consumer waste or post-consumer waste, we all have to work on longevity of the products so that they can stay for longer, and we can keep them using again and again. And we work on our 3 Rs principle: recycle, reuse, and reduce. And we actually reduce the consumption and we work on it. So that is what I think is going to bring sustainability in the long term. So it all starts with us. So that's what I wanted to add. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anne, would you like to add anything? Sorry, I think you're muted. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, for me, sustainable for fashion industry means that the environment and the level of human welfare, cultural heritage, and the economy can be sustainable development, not just the environment sustainability. Because if simply emphasizing on the environment may limit the economy development. So I think the industry of fashion will concern about the different aspects, and the whole aspects in the fashion chain should be linked together and find a more sustainable way to develop. So I think maybe in this concern, our industry should find a more sustainable way to concern about all the aspects. So maybe sustainable slow fashion will be a good choice to be developed. That is what I'm looking for now.
Great, thank you. So the next question that I think it would be interesting to explore is, who is responsible for sustainability in fashion? So as I mentioned before, my research has focused at the consumer level, and there are 2 issues, I think, with having the consumer be responsible via his or her choices about fashion for sustainability in fashion. The first is that it doesn't really work because, as I mentioned, although the consumers say that they're very concerned about these issues, we can see the continued popularity of fast fashion brands such as Primark, H&M, Zara, and also kind of not a willingness to trade off, whether it's trading off paying more money for slow fashion or trading off stylishness and newness for slow fashion. There just hasn't been a lot of pickup on it. So waiting for consumers to kind of lead the way, I'm not sure if that is the best way forward. So I would pose the question to the panel: who do you think is responsible for kind of helping to push the industry to having more sustainability in fashion? Emily, would you like to go first?
Sure. Sure. I didn't want to jump in again first if someone else was ready, but still, certainly. So I think, yes, that you've got a range of people who are all responsible. Consumers take a role businesses are very much responsible and governments take a responsibility. So I don't think it is just one player who takes responsibility, but I think businesses should take responsibility, but it's probably would be helpful if governments required them a little bit more actively to take responsibility. So where you get regulations to encourage extended producer responsibility, or if you get a bit more regulation requiring things to happen, then that can be very helpful. But certainly, so I think that interaction between government and business is probably most effective in making really structural systemic changes happen. But often the most significant changes in the individual sense happen by companies, so that you get companies really committing to it and taking an interesting and focused approach, perhaps a quite comprehensive approach in some cases, and they're able to put the resources into developing particular strategy. So whether it's applying renewable energy, applying a full recycling and collection system, making sure that they work with perhaps hemp providers and develop a new product, hemp underwear, all sorts of other possibilities. Various different companies are working. So you do get interesting innovation with a whole range of different companies working at the problem. So I think often if companies realize that a lot of it is fundamentally their responsibility and they take it on and they go with it, then you really get change happening. But for it to be comprehensive and big scale, wide scale change, you need the intervention of government as well.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts on this from the panelists?
Yeah, I would like to take this question. So basically, sustainable fashion is quite inclusive. When I say inclusive, I mean not only the ethical brands, like who have ethical, the way they're manufacturing is ethical, not only the manufacturers, the retailers, but it trickles down to our end consumer, like us as, our purchasing habits. Now, how do we get the fundamental change? Like, just like to connect to Emily, like, fundamentally, we have to change. Like, how do we change from, slow down the purchasing habits? Like, for example, like if you're going to the wardrobe, like, you don't have to own like so many clothes. Less is more. Like, less is more. Make it your mantra. Like, we don't want to have like, 100 clothes. We can just have quality over quantity. So how do we change our purchasing habits, and how do we slow down? Because slow fashion has also gained the momentum. So instead of going to H&M or Forever 21 or Zara, we can go to our local, business people, our weavers, artisans. That's how I relate to. Like I'm basically from MP, Madhya Pradesh. I'm actually, sustaining the entire supply chain from the weavers community to my workers, the master Gs, to the end consumer. So I am promoting the local businesses like textiles, Indian arts and crafts, the weaves and the crafts. And basically I'm essentially, my product is, I'm using silk chanderi as my base, and I'm building my stories around that. So by, sustaining the weavers, by sustaining the artisans, we are actually trying to slow down the process. And also, one more philosophy is approaching, which is like we connect to the clothes, because these, weaves and crafts have a story, and they are not like, built overnight. So like Chanderi has evolved through Vedic times. So it is a very royal fabric, and it's called woven air. So that is why I connect with that fabric so passionately, that I have in fact gone to the weaver and have literally sat with him in his small, house where they are. We have that hand loom. They have like, hand loom. So I have told him to weave mercerized silk chanderi of 70 grams for my requirement. So he does that for me. So this is how innovation also starts. And, and then when I use technology, like, how do I make it less polluting? I'm using technology. So the basic fabric is a weave, and by using digital printing, which is again a very least polluting technique, I'm actually marrying fashion with technology and giving a very unique product. So in a way, I'm also getting that change. But yes, this product is expensive. It is not cheap, like as you buy. It is not mass produced, because it is there to stay in your wardrobe. What I'm wearing is also sustainable, because I've been wearing this tunic for like many years. And if when it gets torn or worn, I darn it, I fix it, I repair it. So this is what also I tell my consumers also. You love your clothes, rewear, and make them love your clothes, and let them last longer. So connect with them. So that is how the change is coming. Yeah, at least it has happened in my life, and in fact in the community of clientele, the target clientele which I have, that awareness I'm getting. And even we are conducting these workshops in sustainable fashion and styling in many schools and colleges, because the budding new designers have to be aware, how they have to slow down, and how they also have to become responsible as students or as fashion designers. Like how not only they have to talk about the promoting the Indian weaves and crafts, but also they have to change the way they think, how they reduce the carbon footprint. So how they travel, that is also like carbon emission, that also has to be reduced. So all this has to be like basically we all have to put on a thinking caps and understand, how do we save the planet Earth? It starts from us. Like Vandana said, personal initiatives have to be taken. Thank you.
Thanks so much for sharing your story, Sonia. It's very inspiring, and we have a lot of engagement with the audience, which is great. And one of the questions that had been asked is, what is the role of small business in kind of trying to hit these sustainability goals? And I think that your description of what you're doing very much answers this question in an inspiring way. And one of the things that your narrative highlighted too, I think, that is a lot of these initiatives are local, right? So you're engaging with the local, craftspeople to help you to be able to get the type of materials you want in the way you want. Your consumers, I imagine, are relatively local, and so having these kind of locally embedded initiatives that come from small businesses seems to be a wonderful model to move forward with. Some of the questions in the chat are also kind of about larger companies as well, in addition to the small businesses as you described, Sonia. So one question that I think is quite interesting is kind of, what are the myths of sustainable fashion that are being exploited by big brands like H&M, Zara, etc.? Have you seen in any of your research or experience, for example, kind of what the ways in which these bigger brands are trying to do what Sonia has described, but in a less authentic way? So taking these narratives in their kind of marketing materials, but not really living the production process in the way that Sonia described. Would anyone like to speak to that question?
Well, I could jump in then if nobody else is going to say anything. But I mean, I think often what happens is that those big fast fashion companies want to remain as big fast fashion companies. And so they're not challenging the basis of their activity. So they're basically still continuing to pay people very low wages, to have a very high waste and high consumption kind of model. So all those fundamental aspects are still very problematic, and particularly in terms of the ethical aspects of the treatment of the workers. Some of them are doing good things, so it's easy to be cynical and just say it's greenwashing. There are good things in terms of climate action that they're doing, but it doesn't challenge some of the fundamentals in terms of the whole fast fashion model that they're still supporting, and still actually uses a lot of resources and produces pollution, causes a whole range of problems, even if they're sometimes it's tinkering at the edges in terms of the materials they choose. Sometimes it's something more substantial like the climate change actions, but it's still fundamentally that same problem of the fast fashion and often the conditions of production. So they're hiding that to some degree by promoting the good things they're doing in other areas.
Yes, for sure. I think there's, yeah. Yes, we do. We see that quite a lot. So let me ask all of the panelists, what do you think the role of innovation and technology can be to making some of the changes that we've been talking about as being important in the sustainable fashion space?
Yeah, may I answer?
Please do.
Yes. So I think we are seeing a lot of questions in chat also about digitization or the word digital fashion. So I think that's the way ahead, and we have tried to cut down a lot of processes because of digitization. So definitely it is going to be a way for achieving sustainability, and not only in form of uh, shortening the production line, but also I think in bringing innovation in the system while you are producing the products. So like I would like to give an example of a research where we work on a chemical analysis of blends, fiber blends. So mostly these are destructive methods, and I happen to be involved in a research work where we try to explore some non-destructive research techniques for finding the blend ratio, the composition of the blends fibers. So we tried to explore different parameters, and after a lot of research, we narrowed down to a very important property of fibers, which was moisture regain. So that became very important for fibers which were of the same class, like cellulosic fibers. When you talk about linen, when you talk about cotton, when you talk about viscose, so only there was a difference in moisture regain value of these fibers, and that could give a very good direction to a new quantification method for the blends. So we really need to work on different areas where students, where the industry, academia can bring in changes in developing an entire system of innovation and working on newer methods where you can actually work on non-destructive ways or creating wastage. Another example I would like to add here is some of my students were working on a project related to silk wastage. So here in India, we have a silk industry, domestic, wild variety of silk, where you have a lot of wastage, and that's the silk noil, a short fiber, not the filament, the fiber is being produced, and that is ultimately useless, and it is used to make staple fibers. So rather than using it into production of the fabric, they tried to use it in design and development. So that was something which was unbleached, undyed material. It's in its tonal variation had created a beautiful design. So we really need to think, from the bottom, from the grassroots level, how the changes can be brought in, and that is absolutely possible with the help of research work. So definitely there is more room for innovation, and we all are doing our efforts, and definitely we need support from industry, we need support from businesses to take up these kinds of products or the innovation which is happening at institutional levels. So I think that could be a way ahead.
I love these examples, and especially that you're involving your students, Vandana. I also share with you the hope that that these types of institutional initiatives can get a broader reach through platforms like this, which are making them more more known to more people outside of the institutions. So it's wonderful. Any other thoughts on technology, innovation, digital, virtual fashion, and their role in sustainable fashion from other panelists?
Yeah, so when we talk about sustainable fashion, we always tend to build a narrative in our own minds. So when we talk about sustainable, we naturally, it comes to us, it means organic. So when we talk about organic, we mean we have to embrace nature rather than dominate nature. So how do we get about innovations? So how do we grow materials? So how do we grow fabric which is organically grown, like it's like brewing beer? So all these technology developments and research and these productions, these innovations can happen at a lab level, like Vandana was saying. So these innovations can always be done. And I have heard somewhere, I was seeing some some small documentary on sustainable fashion, where people like, they are the sustainable fashion experts in London. So they are using living organisms to come up with a fabric, and they are actually doing laser cut methods to come with such development of such unique fabric. And then talking about natural resources, so we have this cotton from India. And how do we, because we know a lot of pesticides are used to in cotton. But then again, cotton is again very important. And then talking about when we go to a production, a lot of material is wasted, like Emily had highlighted. How do we use that waste? Like how do we recycle that waste? And how do we make clothes having a minimum impact on climate change? Like how do we come? So this is all requires a lot of innovations, and many activities are now emerging, like toxic chemicals. Like for example, somebody was giving the example that in China, like they were eating watermelon, and they knew that watermelon from the market which they purchased. So they asked the vendors, like from where have you bought this water, from where have you sourced this watermelon? So he said, okay, they are grown near that lake. So when they went near that lake, they were shocked to see the color of the entire water. Like lake water in China was totally, it was not like normal water. It was totally blue, orange, yellow. Like basically, it was very messy, because all the factories, all the wasted water from the factories, it was flowing in that local water. So how do we reduce that impact on the climate change? How do we reduce all this impact on fresh local water? So all these things have to be thought of at our level. And how do we bring about that change? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yes, such important issues, and yeah, I'm hopeful that there's lots of other universities like Vandana's who are working on some of the technology and innovation to address them. One of the things I was talking about with my students, this was in a marketing class, so we were approaching it more from the consumer perspective, is kind of digital and virtual fashion. And I see that there's a question about this in the chat as well. So for those of you who might not be familiar with what digital and virtual fashion is, it's when we as a real person appear in our social media wearing different clothes, but the clothes are digital. They're not actual clothes that are on your body. So what this does is that, one of the concepts that's becoming so much more important is the notion of the attention economy, that the way that we as individuals can become successful in our lives is through the attention we can garner in online spaces. And one of the ways that attention can be garnered in online spaces is through exhibiting newness. So there's very much an idea amongst Gen Z in particular, that you can never be seen wearing the same clothes twice in your social media feed. That would be social death. And so, of course, this plays into this idea of fast fashion, because if you can never be seen in the same thing twice, you have to constantly, turn over your wardrobe. And this is where digital fashion comes in, and virtual fashion, which is that you can buy an outfit. So you can you can take a photo of yourself in whatever pose or location you would like, and you upload it to particular websites, and then you can choose an outfit for yourself. And then that outfit gets tailored to your particular pose in that photo. And so you can be seen in something new, but in addition, not just in something new, but in wearing something that no one else is going to have, because it doesn't exist in a store to buy. unless someone else somehow knows about the same digital fashion website as you. But these are becoming more and more common. I mean, I only know of 3, so I'm not saying hugely common, but more and more common. And I think that in particular in this social media space, and in particular with younger consumers, this is really something that is exciting, and in my view, an aspect of innovation and technology from the consumer side that can really have quite a big impact. So I'm interested. My students are also studying how consumers use this. I'm interested to see their findings that they come up with at the end of the semester. Okay, so we've had a question to slightly change the topic about the linkage to country development and country kind of specifically. So in other words, if various fashion companies and fashion designers want to become involved in sustainable fashion, how does this contribute to kind of the reputation of the country, the development of the country? Would anyone like to speak to this question on the panel?
Yeah, so I would just like to, see, we have this notion going on, vocal for local in India. So I'm not sure if you have heard about it or not, but it's something, it's a very trending movement right now, which is going on in our country, vocal for local. So I think somewhere it attaches to sustainability, to the concept of sustainability, where we really want to promote the regional crafts, local techniques, the work of artisans, weavers, and you really want to put those things on top of other imported items, or the things which are made internationally. So that is, I think, something which can support local crafts, and especially in today's time when the world economy is hit badly, and we really need to work on saving our economy. So I think this is a good initiative which has been taken in India, and I'm sure it is going to be an example elsewhere too.
Great, thank you. Emily?
Well, you have similar kind of initiatives in other countries, like in Ghana, where you're emphasizing the local fabrics and encouraging the local designs and production. So that can work really well. And I think you do build up a international reputation in some countries. So India has a strong reputation for natural dyes, and also for a lot of the handcraft production, whether it's hand weave or hand block print and so on. So you have that can be built on and can be referred to by other companies that are using products and skills and fabrics from that country, or promoting it internationally. So that's really good. And then again, other countries also may focus on specific aspects. So whether it might be, I don't know, Scotland and knitted garments and wool and so on. So you might have speciality products that relate to that cultural heritage and builds on the longer history, that you can develop the awareness and the value added and the selling points in terms of sustainability, and link that to the longer national heritage. So I think that's very important, and it's often it's quite a strong trend. So that's coming in quite significantly in China as well, and probably knows more about that, where there's an emphasis on cultural heritage, and a lot of designers are trying to emphasize that and bring that out, a combination of cultural heritage and craft and sustainability aspects.
Great, thanks. An, would you like to expand on that a little?
Is she on?
Oh yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I think in terms of design, because I'm teach design, so I just know more about the designers and companies in China. And for the sustainable fashion, designers may often ask themselves two questions. One is, where does our fashion come from? Another is, how should our fashion be expressed? I think everyone has a different understanding of these different questions. In China, some designers and brands have long been committed to the combination of traditional handicrafts and modern aesthetics, and so as to make the sustainable fashion with Chinese characteristics. And for this years, Chinese customers are more and more like the traditional cultural things. So I think this for the Chinese market, this is a very important selling point. And for example, for the application of Chinese traditional handicraft, on one hand, if the craft are not be applied, they will eventually disappear. And through the understanding of male embroidery and batik or peach silk, and another traditional Chinese costume skills, and fashion transformation is carried out to make these skills have a new vitality. On one hand, cultural heritage is carried out, which is also an important aspect of sustainable development. And the sustainable development of culture can't stay at ornamental level only when there is a healthy ecological chain and supply and demand market can have a sustainable development. On the other hand, mutual addition can enhance the value of the product, which can prolong the life of the clothes. Maybe this is a very important part for the durability for the clothes and its health for the sustainable fashion. But I think how the customer have awareness of fashion, it depends on the economy and the education. So for the developing country like China, customers still need to more education. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. When you were describing kind of elements of what kind of how cultural heritage and sustainability can come together, it reminded me of the Chinese brand Shangja. So I put it into the chat so you guys can see how it's spelled if you want to look it up. But although this brand is quite expensive, so it's not kind of a brand for everyone, I think they do a wonderful job of combining those elements together. And your comments also made me think that, you know, it wasn't too long ago when countries like China and Vietnam, for example, were competing for who could provide the lowest price workers in the garment industry. Like, oh, come and manufacture here. We have workers even less, so it'll be cheaper for you. And now you really don't see that that type of rhetoric anymore. And the competition between countries is more about exactly what you were highlighting. Rather than who can kind of do it cheapest. It's great to see these moving forward developing countries. So in terms of thinking about business models and what business models can look like with regards to sustainable fashion, what do you think some commonalities amongst business models that can engage in sustainable fashion would look like? Or what would some of those commonalities be? How do you see a successful business model evolving?
So I would like to take this question. So when we talk about sustainable fashion, normally this narrative is directed towards slow fashion. So when we talk about slow fashion, it essentially means we are using natural fabrics, which are upcycled. Then we are using natural textiles, then which are organically grown, and even dyes, which are eco dyes, plant dyes, not chemical dyes. And then talking about production, production is ethically, like, ethical production of garments, because no bonded labor, no child labor, no cheap labor, everything is done ethically in our in-house production. Then minimum waste. We also have to be responsible, as nobody is watching us, but in our own in-house production, we also have to minimize the waste. Like, for example, in my production, whenever we cut a fabric, if we have any waste material, we recycle and we make a bag, and we give it to the consumer. We make a, that, so if we have zero waste. So this is how we are using even the scrap material. And then minimum water usage. How do we come up with technology or innovations where we can minimize the water usage? Then we talk about distribution. So in sustainable fashion, what comes to my mind is small batch manufacturing. It is not fast fashion, it is slow fashion. So small batches, manufacturing in small quantities, because we are actually sustaining the supply chain from the weavers. Weavers will take some amount of time to weave. Like, for example, my weaver takes 3 to 4 days to weave 13 meters of fabric. Now, if I convert that into a machine-made fabric in Surat or something, it will be done maybe in hours or seconds. You understand? So that is the difference. And eco-transportation, we have to rethink, our business models. And then maybe, like, now, like you're saying, the virtual is the new real. Online sales, when we promote sustainable fashion and online sales, because the ongoing pandemic is a big blow to humankind. We have to change our habits. It is like nature is telling us, slow down. So everything has to change now.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts? So I think that's a wonderful example of how it can happen with, in particular, with kind of small businesses and slow fashion. Are there any ideas with regards to, say, larger companies or maybe currently fast fashion companies about how their business models could transform if they're maybe not able to do it in the way that Sonia described, but taking some of those principles and embedding it into a larger organization? Do you think that's possible?
I think a lot of the bigger companies can apply a much more integrated management system for sustainability. So they have corporate social responsibility structures, which enables them to meet challenging targets and to require this as a whole aim within the business. So bringing it through in the mission of the company and in the operations of the company and in what each local manager or each person of responsibility within that company has to achieve these targets, and that this is a key thing the whole company is focused on. So I think that kind of process where you have targets and you have auditing and so on, it's a bit more dull as a system perhaps, but it's actually something that a lot of companies are putting in place. And so that means that it works as a model to make them speed up their transition to a much more sustainable kind of model. So if they put in these ambitious targets about saying that all their dyes will be non-toxic by 4 years ahead, or that they will be reduce their water consumption by 50% in 2 years' time or something, and then they really put the resources of the company into focusing on those particular issues. So that often works well as a system.
Great, yeah, for sure. And I was also reminded by Sonia's comments when she was talking about, that it takes longer to make when you engage in these ways of making sustainable fashion, that this past year so many of the high fashion designers signed a pledge saying that they weren't going to have multiple collections per year, that they only wanted to do 1 or possibly 2 per year. And so I wonder if that's going to provide kind of the space to start engaging in some of these methods and practices that maybe they just didn't have before, even if they had, the best of intentions. They just didn't have the space to do that. So hopefully that will have a substantial effect on their business models and their production methods.
Yeah, there does seem to have been quite a big change during the whole pandemic period, with the standard structures of the fashion industry slowing down substantially. So although lots of people have been saying it's important, a lot of the people active in the industry as buyers and going to all these international shows, the pandemic's made such a change to them that they've actually started adapting to some of these ideas and deciding to go for fewer events and fewer ranges and all those kind of things. So I think that has made a difference.
I think
yes,
we have
I
to become
hope
more
so.
aware. Sorry. No, I was saying
Please
we
go
have
ahead.
to become more aware, because sustainability means people, planet, profit. So when we talk about all things, we have to balance the entire ecosystem. How do we balance the ecosystem? Like the people, the planet, and the profit. You know, if everything is balanced, automatically we'll come back to our own original selves. We won't be wearing masks. There'll be, like, holistic, awareness. Everybody will be talking about, because this is actually a warning giving to us by Mother Nature. Slow down, So the balancing act is already happening. And if we don't take action now, I think so, we are gone. They are the future of fashion, the future of the planet. It all depends upon us, whether we go downhill or we become aware and we slow down.
You make a great point, but I think we're at a pivotal moment in history now, and what we do as we come out of this moment will be have an outsized effect, I think, on what the next stage will look like. So it's perfect timing for an event like this, where we can talk a little bit about what how that's coming out of this moment can look like. So there's a comment in the chat, which I think is an important one to discuss. So a lot of sustainable fashion is expensive. And in many ways, it's absolutely worth it in terms of supporting the artisans that develop it. And as Sonia mentioned earlier, it can be a commitment to buy a piece of clothing that you keep for your whole life. So if you think about the cost as cost per wear, which is an often a phrase used a lot in fashion. What's the cost per wear? If you have high cost per wear, then maybe the expensive price tag is worth it. But even with all of these, there's kind of no getting around the fact that a lot of, a very high percentage of people in the world today, in any country, simply can't afford to buy some of the more expensive sustainable fashion. How do you think we can overcome this? I mean, is it a matter of trying to take what's happening in the smaller, more expensive spaces and allowing it that the cheaper clothes would be able to have the same type of sustainability embedded into it? Or do you think it's a case that in order for fashion to be cheap in the first place, it has to have those kind of unsustainable practices built into it? How do you see this tension between kind of expensiveness and sustainable fashion?
I think it's possible that companies can make moderate priced fashion with it still being sustainable. So you do get examples of companies that appear to be achieving that, like Rapunai, who have very good use of renewable energy. They collect and recycle the garments afterwards, and they still end up being sort of £12 for a t-shirt or something. So you get some companies that do seem to manage it and have an integrated system. Often you have a more classic type product, so that they're not constantly changing. They were able to be relatively efficient in their processes and so on. But also some of the other bigger companies are able to improve their quality and improve their materials and aspects like that. And so that although they're still relatively cheap, they kind of move to slow fashion to a degree. The fast fashion companies are never going to do it entirely, but they move from being, really exploitative and selling something for £4 and selling something for £8, so it's still achievable, but they've managed to change the materials, change the dyes, introduce collection and recycling systems, and so on. So they have a more sustainable model, a more circular eco-design model, even if they can't go to the full slow fashion approach.
Great, thank you. Other thoughts from panelists on this issue?
And
Yes.
I think.
Yeah, please
Sorry.
go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't think sustainable fashion is very expensive or just wealthy rich people can buy it, because like collaborative consumption is a new sustainable business model, which including all kinds of business model that share rather than own products. This approach includes serve or like rental, lending, or trading. It focuses on point-to-point sharing, like resale platforms such as fashion libraries or other platforms like second-hand clothes or antique shops or charity shops, something like that. So I don't think sustainable fashion just for the rich people. Thank you.
Thanks. Vandana?
I would like
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah, may I? Yeah. So actually, I also think the same, on the same lines, because changes are not going to happen overnight. And we really need to work on all three ends: man, material, and machine. It's not going to happen in one day. The things would not become cheaper. See, why right now we are in a phase where we can actually explore and adopt things. So we should be open to it. And I think it would start, first of all, with consumer awareness. If people are aware about, and like Sonia ma'am has said, that you need to make a connection with the narrative of the product. So if we make that connection and we make our consumers aware about it, and when the demand in the market changes, so definitely the retailers, the manufacturers, they will look for developing such kind of products only. So it's both ways. It has to happen from both the ends, that from the consumers as well as from the manufacturers. And we cannot see that change happening in one day, one night, or we are already, we all are aware. I mean, right now we all are sitting here and talking about this thing. There are few attendees with us who are listening to these, this topic. They are sharing their views. So changes are happening, and I'm sure it will happen in future too. We all need to be connected, unified for this thing. So this will happen definitely. So we should all be open for adopting, and definitely there has to be more awareness for the use of second-hand clothing, because we sometimes feel there are a lot of brands working on these kinds of products, but we really don't want to use it because of maybe prestige, or it's an old thing, or somebody has already used it. So we really have to be open to explore such things. And that is what going to bring the change, I guess.
Thank you, Vandana. Sonia?
Yeah, so, what my take on this is, it is a social responsibility. So, in one of my quotes, I have shared that we all have to take a firm resolve to become responsible. And how do we make fashion inclusive? It's not only exclusive now, we have to make fashion more inclusive, because it is not about I, me, myself anymore. It's all about coexistence, community, collaborations, cooperations, because planet Earth is like literally telling us, we have to understand how to do the balancing act. So we have to make fashion more inclusive by not only there's a feel good factor, because fashion is all about feeling good, but it's not only about feeling good, but it is all about looking good, feeling good, and even doing good. Now how we are doing good? By sustaining these small weavers and artisans, and hand holding them, because their bread and butter depends upon how we buy, or how we even look after them. So it's all about sustaining the entire supply chain. So that's social responsibility. It's a mindset. We have to change this mindset. that fashion revolution has already happened and it is further happening. And I'm sure with all this awareness, all this, what we are having these panel discussions, when we go into our respective communities, I'm sure we're going to take this message forward, like, be responsible, be conscious, like, buy less. Less is more.
Yes.
Less is more is powerful. Another kind of phrase that I like and I think is quite powerful is the high cost of low prices. That was the title of a documentary about Walmart, but it applies to obviously much more than just Walmart. I think once people really start to understand the high cost of the low prices that they're paying, I agree that it can really change a mindset significantly. So an issue that I think it's important to discuss, and I've noticed there's been a couple questions about in the chat, are issues related to supply chain. And I think, supply chain is such an important aspect of understanding sustainable fashion. So one of the questions here kind of relates to sourcing. So how challenging is it to source different, aspect, whether it's the fabric itself or the trim that would be used, to know that it's kind of sustainable and ethical? How much is this a challenge within the supply chain? This is, of course, what a lot of big brands talk about all the time. Well, we had no idea. We hire someone else in our supply chain, hired these people to make it, or we didn't know it was this type of production in terms of how the fabric were made, because it was one of our outsourcers who had done this. We weren't even aware. How difficult is it to actually follow down your supply chain and to source things in the way that you want them to be, especially if you're a larger fashion company, I think? Any comments on this or thoughts? I'm posing it as a question. Yeah. How difficult, can you any ideas for how to kind of be able to manage or control this better, perhaps?
I think it can be very difficult and complex with big companies which have such detailed supply chains with thousands of subcontractors and suppliers. I think really the effective response to it is to have a less complicated supply chain, really, where you build partnerships and you know who your suppliers are and you build the relationships over time, so you can support particular craftspeople, you can support particular workers, and you know how they're made in those firms. So you build up those relationships and you have a much more in-depth understanding of the sustainability of the materials and the conditions in those particular firms and so on. So I think really that's the answer, rather than going for cheapness and then requiring people to subcontract in order to meet those almost impossible cheapness targets.
Sonia, would you like to comment?
Yes, what she said Emily said is absolutely correct, because this is what is actually, we have to understand that it is not about bulk manufacturing. It's fast, this whole mindset has to change, because we have to even have slow, very small sized in, manufacturing in small batches. That understanding has to be developed, because sustainable fashion doesn't correlate with, bulk manufacturing. It doesn't make sense, because weavers have a capacity to weave only this much. So it is, it's going to be exclusive. It will not be like, out there. You cannot have a wholesale manufacturing of sustainable fashion. It is a very, very unique product. And with the building, understanding, like many brands are coming up, like in India, we have Good Earth. You must have heard of Good Earth. Good Earth actually is using the best practicing the Nicobar. There are these bigger brands who are actually have adopted sustainable fashion and ethical practices. And what they are doing, and in Fab India, they are actually, looking after these small artisans and weavers and are promoting them and as vendors, and they are supplying to these big brands, and they are actually looking after and their livelihood. So the entire supply chain has to be, sustained. So it is a emotion. There's a emotions also, because it contains the livelihood of many, working class, the weavers and the artisans. So that emotions go behind it. There's a lot of difference between a machine made and a handmade. So handmade product will always be, expensive. It will be slow, and it will be in small quantities. So we have to change this whole mindset of, like, for example, we have to understand that we have to say repeat, instead of talking about, having 10 clothes, repeat, rewear, love your clothes. So these hashtags, now this whole new, you're talking about this new generation. When we add these hashtags, repeat, rewear, love your clothes, who made my clothes, fashion revolution, so that awareness has to be built in. And I think so, I am convinced that with this ongoing, environment changes, people, the new generation will also become aware, at least the new designers and the, the youth, the future generation will also understand the importance of buying less rather than buying more. And also of promoting, the supply chain of literally sustaining the supply chain, because it is like, it is the impact it is having, everybody is noticing it. Like, we stay in Delhi, I have come to Goa recently, but impact of like in the climatic change, Delhi is so polluted, so staying in polluted cities, Vandana can totally understand with me. We know that what we to breathe fresh air, it is like a luxury for us. So where is this luxury? So all this understanding has to be, now literally created, and then we have to sort of through these panel discussions, we have to take this forward. This awareness has to spread to become more responsible socially, and buy less. Again, I'll come back to less is more.
Yes, I think I totally agree with you. I think it does need to go beyond awareness, because as you've said, the awareness is getting higher and higher, but we haven't necessarily seen the changes in consumption patterns that correlate with those high levels of awareness. But awareness is certainly the first step, and yeah, hopefully it's going to, levels of awareness will translate into action as we move forward. So there's been a couple other questions in the chat related to other supply chain issues. So for example, labeling, which I think is an important one, and one that's been kind of controversial as well within the sustainable fashion space, because when you call something organic or when you call something sustainable on a label, what legally does that mean? And so the question that's been asked kind of in the chat here is that sometimes you can have a natural material, but it's gone through chemical processes, but yet it can still be labeled natural. Any thoughts and ideas about kind of what's happening in terms of labeling within the sustainable fashion space?
I think it can be very helpful to put in clear information that does tend to make that link, so that customers find it easier to make choices based on knowledge and remember about ideas about sustainability. So I think that if you can put on your website or on your clothes labels, your tags and things like that, information about the materials and about the ethical production, then I think it's very helpful. Also, I think certifications tend to bridge that gap too, so that although general words like sustainability aren't legally defined, if you have a fair trade label, or if you have an organic GOTS label, then you know to what extent it's organic because it follows the GOTS requirements and so on. So quite a lot of companies will go to those certifications in order to make something that you can rely on a little bit more. And I think, you know, if as a company or as a retailer which sells a wide range of brands, if you have traffic light systems, or if you have a whole range of kind of information that comes up automatically for all the clothes, then you can encourage people to consume sustainably. If they're going to consume, at least be aware of those issues when they're making those decisions. And so it needs to come in right in that biobehavior process so that they make the decisions based on those criteria, not just the criteria of the appearance of the garment that appears on their screen or in front of them.
Yeah, it's almost like you're suggesting kind of, you know, how on food there's mandatory labeling about ingredients and percentages of vitamins, etc. Something similar in the fashion industry.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah,
interesting.
that's also
Sonia.
very debatable. You know why? Because certificates can be bought. I personally feel it's their personal ethics, your personal ethos which come in, like how conscious you are, how your conscience is allowing you to, you know, you can buy a certificate for just for legal purposes, but at the behind the scene, like you said, H&M and all, just they're trying to, correlate their fast fashion with slow fashion. It all comes down to all our, behavior as, manufacturers, consumers. We have to be responsible. I feel like personal ethos also come in a lot.
Yeah, and I would add to that that some of the labeling, which is kind of consistent. So Emily, you had mentioned fair trade, for example. The way consumers interpret these is oftentimes not what we would think. So for example, in the coffee category with fair trade coffee, when consumers see that, yes, they believe that it has been produced in an ethical way, but they also think it automatically means it's more expensive. And this is one of the reasons why, given a choice, a lot of consumers won't choose the fair trade because they just assume they're going to be paying more for essentially something that costs the same. And it's not that they don't care about how the coffee was produced, it's just oftentimes given particular contextual variables like, oh, I don't get paid until next week or whatever the case may be, I'm just going to buy the non-fair trade now. So it's, yeah, it's interesting how these different labels are used and perceived by consumers. And I would also just add, I think there's also a lot of confusion. So for example, even if you see that something is labeled fair trade, but it was made in a different country, is it actually more ethical for you to buy something local, even if it's not certified that way, because the carbon footprint is lower? And so I think that a lot of consumers get kind of confused about this in that moment of purchase as well. So the whole kind of labeling thing is more nuanced and complex, I think, than a lot of people assume. And so that's why your point, Sonia, that it comes down to kind of individual ethics and views on the world is ultimately is an important one. So I think there's another question in the chat that is important to address as well, which is what about the jobs of the people already working in the fashion industry? So if we remove large-scale manufacturing and the way that things are done now, in particular in developing countries where there may not be a ton of alternate types of jobs for the workers to have, how can we consider this in terms of our thoughts on how the industry can transform?
Yes, surely it is going to be a challenge in developing countries because we do not have, there might not be that much infrastructure support and financial support by the agencies. But right now, the approach should be to flourish the small businesses in sustainable space because that is more workable and doable. We cannot switch to large system or large manufacturing systems transferring their technology for sustainable practices, at one time. So it will take time and there will be an impact, but I think we need to make people skilled, and in some way we need to make them more versatile in using the technology related to sustainable fashion. Like we talk about dyeing with natural dyes. So I don't know if we go to any local dyer, if they know the recipe or even how the dyeing practice, or what should be, how many how much time should we dip the fabric or anything like that. So we need to make them skilled, and we may need to make them learn about these things, and probably with time they will come up with a solution. And again, right now we cannot see that it can happen in all the companies, but surely and slowly, like we say, slow fashion. So slowly, this concept is going to be imbibed in the industry, and people will be more supportive. Businesses will be more supportive, and there will be changes in the technology, and that will. I know I'm sounding on a positive note, but definitely we need we need some support in that sense, and we need to work businesses, or make our businesses work in that way. So it will take time, but it will happen. We need to work for it. Yes.
Great, thank you. I like your emphasis on kind of our retraining, and so hopefully governments will pick up on this. So I started out the conversation by asking all of you kind of what is sustainable fashion, and I think a nice way to end it is on the note of accountability. So we've talked about what sustainable fashion is and a lot of the complex issues involved with trying to get to where we all want to be. But in the end, what are your thoughts on accountability? You know, how can we hold different whether it's companies or consumers or governments, accountable for instilling some of the changes and innovative ideas we've been talking about today? What do you think the role of accountability is in these changes, and how can we get it, and with which actors?
So the government can take initiatives for example, in India, the textile ministry holds these textile fairs on and off to, get that integration, collaboration also. So what they do, they invite vendors from artisans and weavers from different small grassroots levels, and they will bring under one big platform, under one big umbrella body, and then they will invite international buyers, to come. So this sort of initiatives is very much required, and government support is required. And also MSME, medium and small scale industries. There's one agency which is also helping small scale manufacturers and medium scale manufacturers by giving them, support. So entrepreneurship is what is, being promoted in our country. Then that government, PM is saying Atmanirbhar Bano. That means we have to, become self-employed. We have to become independent. So only when we start thinking in terms of becoming, financially independent, the support will be there, from the government, from agencies, which are always there to promote, such industries.
Great, thank you. Emily?
Yes, that I think that kind of support from government and from organizations that Sonia was talking about is really helpful. So there are a whole range of charitable foundations and industry organizations about sustainable fashion and so on. All that helps. Government actions. So in the UK, setting up the SCAP for the Clothing Action Plan. Things like that can help push retailers and clothing companies to meet particular targets. And when you have, again, the climate action groups, and you are committing to achieve the Paris climate reductions and things like that. So there are a range of organizations and governments that can very much help in that way. And also you have campaigning organizations that are very good, so that they like Good On You and various others like that, that assess companies and give an external viewpoint, so that they're saying, okay, you may say you're very good, but we only give you 43 out of 100 because there are all these aspects that need to be improved or something. So I think they have a significant role as well. And of course, consumer interest and consumer pressure, all that makes a difference.
Thank
And
you.
I think Yeah, and I think there
Go
can be
ahead.
collaborations with waste management companies, which can really be integrated with manufacturing units, apparel and textile manufacturing mills, where you can have a partnership-based collaboration for the waste management. So probably that is something which can be looked upon.
Yes, and you can often have government to support to make that happen. So like the RAP organization in the UK or others, again, setting up systems for much more effective extended producer responsibility or wider systems for collection and so on to really engage with these issues. So that can be very helpful.
Great. I love that we're ending on all of these really useful suggestions, which hopefully a lot of us a lot of you who have come today are perhaps in a position to help start to implement them. In the interest of time, I'm going to wrap things up now. I'm going to turn it over to Bhavya to say goodbye to everyone in a moment. But on behalf of myself, thank you to everyone who came and all of the questions you contributed. And thank you so much to the panelists for your enthusiasm and your insights. It's been a pleasure to talk with you all today, and I've learned so much, and I wish you all the best with your future work in sustainable fashion. Bhavya.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all the panelists for making time to be part of this dialogue. A big thank you to Gianna as well for graciously, holding fort for all of us. I wish you all the best professionally, personally. A big thank you also to our attendees who also made time to be part of this discussion. I hope you enjoyed it. I know for one that I learned a lot about sustainable fashion in the past hour or so. Finally, a special mention to Shweta Chaudhary, who is a Bhajan Lal scholar. She painstakingly put this entire event together. So thank you so much for that. Thank you also to Lauren for doing the admin today as well. So on that note, I sincerely hope that all of us can hope for and work towards a sustainable future. And again, wishing all of you the very best happiness and great health.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
And let's take it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Bhavya. Thank you, Gianna.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Bye-bye.